Ellie Blake was an ordinary woman living in a small, unassuming house in rural Maine. Her life, marked by routines and quiet simplicity, had never been extraordinary. Yet it was in the most mundane of tasks, clearing out the attic of her late grandmother's house, that Ellie stumbled upon the mystery that would consume her. The attic was filled with dusty relics of a life long lived, sepia-toned photographs, old trinkets, and yellowed lace curtains. But amidst the clutter, Ellie's attention was drawn to a creaky floorboard that felt loose underfoot. Beneath it, she discovered an envelope, faded with age and addressed only with her grandmother's maiden initials. Her breath quickened as she carefully opened it, revealing a short but cryptic note written in her grandmother's unmistakable cursive. "To uncover the truth is to shoulder its weight. Look where we buried the heart." Ellie stared at the words, their meaning shrouded in mystery. Her grandmother had always been a playful woman, fond of riddles and games, but this note felt different. There was an edge to its tone, a sense of foreboding that Ellie couldn't ignore. Over the following days, the note lingered in her mind like a shadow. Intrigued, she began sifting through more of her grandmother's belongings, looking for clues. She uncovered a collection of journals, each one meticulously written, documenting decades of her grandmother's life. But even these entries felt odd. Among tales of everyday life, Ellie found cryptic sentences scattered throughout. "The forest remembers everything, and the heart remains where it was buried." What did it all mean? And why had her grandmother chosen to hide this part of her life? Her curiosity turned into obsession as she pored over every journal, every photograph, and every relic she could find. Certain faces in the old photos were scratched out with deliberate force, and some dates didn't align with family stories. Ellie's thoughts kept circling back to the forest behind her grandmother's home, a dense, untamed expanse that she had always been told to avoid as a child. The phrase, "the forest remembers everything," echoed in her mind. Could the answers be hidden there? On a crisp morning, she decided to explore the forest. It felt different now, as if the trees were leaning in closer, their shadows darker and more ominous. Her heart raced as she walked deeper into the woods, searching for some kind of sign. Though she found nothing that day, the feeling of being watched stayed with her long after she returned home. The note had unearthed more than just curiosity. It had awakened something else entirely, an unease that hinted at a darker truth buried in her family's past. The forest behind Ellie's grandmother's house had always been a place of mystery. As a child, Ellie had been told never to venture too far into its depths. Her grandmother would often say, "The forest holds its own secrets. It's better not to disturb them." Back then, those words had seemed like nothing more than a cautionary tale to keep her safe. But now, with the cryptic note in her possession and her grandmother's journals echoing the same sentiment, the forest no longer felt like just a stretch of untamed land. It felt alive, as though it had been waiting for her. Ellie decided to follow her instincts and explore what her grandmother called the hidden heart. She remembered the name vaguely, mentioned in passing when she was younger, but now it took on new significance. With a spade in hand, she ventured into the overgrown wilderness. The air seemed heavier as she walked deeper, the sounds of the world muffled by the dense canopy above. Eventually, Ellie came upon a small clearing. Wildflowers bloomed in chaotic bursts of color, and an ancient oak tree stood at the center, its gnarled branches twisting skyward. This, she thought, must be the place. She began to dig, her hands trembling as the spade struck the earth. It wasn't long before she unearthed a small, rusted tin box. Her heart pounded as she pried it open. Inside were 3 items: a delicate pocket watch, a blood-stained handkerchief, and a brittle newspaper clipping. The watch gleamed even in its tarnished state, and Ellie could just make out an engraving on its back, "To M.H. Forever Yours." The handkerchief was stiff and brown with age, but the stains were unmistakable. She forced herself to focus on the newspaper clipping, which bore a headline that made her blood run cold: "Local woman Margaret Holloway missing. Search called off." Margaret Holloway. The name rang faintly familiar. Ellie realized it was mentioned briefly in one of her grandmother's journals, but never in detail. The article outlined the story of a woman who had vanished decades earlier, with suspicions but no conclusive evidence. The connection to her grandmother was vague, only a passing mention of the family as acquaintances. Yet this box suggested something far more intimate. As Ellie stood in the clearing, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves around her. She felt an uncanny sensation, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. A shiver ran down her spine. She told herself it was just the chill in the air. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was being watched. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. Her dreams were filled with shadowy figures and whispers that seemed to echo her grandmother's words, "The forest remembers everything." And when she awoke, she found something outside her window that made her heart stop. Fresh footprints in the soil, leading from the forest and ending beneath her sill. Ellie's days became consumed with research. The tin box had raised more questions than answers, and she couldn't rest until she unraveled the truth. She started with the name Margaret Holloway, combing through local archives at the library. The more Ellie read, the clearer it became that Margaret's disappearance was far from an ordinary case. According to police reports, Margaret had vanished without a trace in 1973. She was last seen leaving her home late one evening, reportedly distraught after a heated argument with an unidentified person. Witnesses claimed to have heard shouting coming from the Holloway residence earlier that night, but no one came forward with solid evidence. What struck Ellie as odd was the abruptness with which the investigation had been closed. A mere 2 weeks after Margaret went missing, the case was quietly shelved, with authorities citing insufficient evidence to pursue further leads. The articles hinted at rumors but offered no clear suspects. Ellie's search led her to a collection of family photographs she hadn't noticed before. One image in particular caught her attention, a group photo of her grandmother and several young women taken long before Ellie was born. Margaret's name was scribbled on the back, along with the date 1972. In the photo, her grandmother and Margaret stood close, their smiles warm but their body language guarded. What had started as a missing person case now felt deeply personal. Why had her grandmother never spoken about Margaret? And why were parts of the family's history so deliberately obscured? Ellie's unease deepened when an anonymous letter appeared in her mailbox. The envelope bore no return address, and its contents were chilling. Leave the past alone. Some truths are better left buried. The letter confirmed her fears. Someone knew she was digging into this decades-old mystery and wanted her stopped. But Ellie was determined. She couldn't shake the feeling that her grandmother had left the note in the attic for a reason, trusting her to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She returned to the clearing in the forest, hoping to find more clues. As she dug deeper into the soil, her spade struck something hard. Her breath caught as she uncovered what appeared to be a human bone. Trembling, she called the authorities, who quickly cordoned off the area. The remains were confirmed to be Margaret Holloway's. Forensic evidence suggested foul play, but the decades that had passed made it difficult to pinpoint exactly how she had died. Ellie felt a strange mix of relief and dread. She had found Margaret, but the questions surrounding her death remained unanswered. The discovery of Margaret Holloway's remains sent shockwaves through the small community. For Ellie, it was a turning point. She had hoped that uncovering Margaret's body would bring clarity, but instead it only deepened the mystery. As investigators combed through the evidence, Ellie returned to her grandmother's journals, desperate for anything she might have missed. One passage stood out, its meaning now chillingly clear: love is the heaviest burden of all, especially when it's forbidden. Ellie began to suspect that Margaret and her grandmother shared a bond far deeper than friendship. The engraved pocket watch, the intimate photograph, and the cryptic journal entries all pointed to a connection that her grandmother had deliberately hidden. But why? The answers didn't come from the journals or the police reports. They came from whispers within her own family. At a tense family gathering, Ellie overheard a heated argument between two of her aunts. Their words hinted at long-buried suspicions that her grandmother had been involved in Margaret's disappearance, perhaps even her death. Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, Ellie confronted her aunts. They reluctantly admitted that there had always been rumors about her grandmother and Margaret's relationship, but nothing concrete. Some believed the two women had been lovers in a time when such relationships were taboo. Others whispered about a jealous lover or a family feud that had spiraled out of control. Ellie's mind swirled with possibilities. If her grandmother had loved Margaret, could her death have been an act of passion, betrayal, or even mercy? The lack of clear answers left Ellie feeling more conflicted than ever. The final twist came in the form of a letter, postmarked years after her grandmother's death. Ellie recognized the handwriting instantly. It was unmistakably her grandmother's. The letter read, "If you're reading this, you found her. Margaret deserved better than what the world gave her. And I did what I thought was right. You'll understand in time. The forest remembers, but it forgives too. Burn this and let her rest. The cryptic confession offered no clear answers, only more ambiguity. Did her grandmother kill Margaret out of jealousy or to protect her? Was Margaret a victim of circumstances beyond their control, or had someone else entirely been responsible? Ellie wrestled with the decision of what to do next. In the end, she chose not to burn the letter. She donated the pocket watch and Margaret's story to the local museum, ensuring that their legacy would not be forgotten. But the weight of those secrets stayed with her, a burden she would carry for the rest of her life. Late at night, as the wind rustled the trees outside her window, Ellie often wondered if the forest truly forgave, or if it merely kept its secrets.